Young Widow and Her 4 Children, by Abandoned Winery, and what they find inside changes everything. Emily Carter held the keys to the property with trembling hands while her 4 children waited silently beside her. At 35, she had invested all her savings into that abandoned winery in Napa Valley, in a desperate attempt to start over after her husband's premature departure. The rusty iron gate creaked as she pushed it open, revealing a stone path leading to the main brick building covered in ivy. The old wagon wheel beside the entrance seemed like a symbol of time standing still in that forgotten place. James, the eldest 12-year-old son, walked beside his mother, holding the hand of his youngest sister, Emma, just 6 years old. The twins, Noah and Ethan, 9 years old, ran ahead exploring every corner with the natural curiosity of their age. "Mommy, why does this house seem so sad?" Emma asked, clutching her rag doll to her chest. Emily didn't know how to answer. The truth was that she herself felt lost at that moment. She had bought the property through a broker who seemed in too much of a hurry to close the deal, and now, seeing the state of neglect of the place, she began to question if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The interior of the main house smelled of mold and accumulated dust. Furniture covered with white sheets created strange shadows in the main room, and spider webs decorated the corners like lace forgotten by time. The boys began exploring the rooms while Emily tried to imagine how to turn that place into a cozy home for her family. "Mum, there's a locked door down here," shouted Noah from what appeared to be the kitchen. Emily found the children gathered before a heavy wooden door with an old lock. The keys the broker had given her included several she hadn't yet identified. After a few attempts, one of them turned in the lock with a dull click. The door opened, revealing a stone staircase descending into the basement. The air that rose was cold and carried a sweet, fermented aroma that immediately transported her to childhood memories of visiting her grandparents' house in the countryside. James went down first, followed by the twins, while Emily carried Emma in her arms. The basement was larger than they expected. Oak barrels lined up occupied most of the space, some still containing liquids of dubious origin. Stone shelves on the walls held dusty bottles of different sizes. It was clearly a wine cellar that had once been prosperous, but now was abandoned like the rest of the property. "Look back here, Mom." Ethan had found something interesting behind a row of larger barrels. Emily approached and saw hundreds of envelopes yellowed with time, tied in bundles with frayed strings. Some were scattered on the floor as if someone had dropped them in a hurry. All appeared to be correspondence addressed to a certain Richard Thompson, whom she assumed was the previous owner. She picked up one of the envelopes from the floor. The paper was yellowed and fragile, but still legible. In the upper left corner was written Morrison Family, New York, NY, and it was dated almost 20 years ago. What intrigued her most was that the envelope had never been opened. "Why are there so many letters here, Mommy?" asked James, picking up another envelope from the floor. "I don't know, my son. It seems like the previous owner didn't open his mail." Emily felt a strange chill. There was something disturbing about the idea of hundreds of unread letters abandoned in a damp basement like buried secrets. She collected a few envelopes and went upstairs with the children, deciding to investigate later when they were settled. The rest of the day was spent organizing the basics so they could sleep in the house that first night. Emily had brought sleeping bags and enough supplies for a few days, while she decided whether she would actually stay or return to San Francisco, admitting failure. When the children finally fell asleep in the main room, huddled together like puppies seeking protection, she lit some candles and sat down to examine the letters she had brought from the basement. The first one she opened made her heart race. "Dear Mr. Richard, I write in desperation as my daughter's wedding will take place in 2 weeks, and I still haven't received the special wine I ordered 3 months ago. I already paid the full amount of $5,000 as agreed, and I urgently need an update on the delivery. You promised it would be the most special wine she had ever tasted, perfect for the toast on her big day. Please contact me. Sincerely, David Morrison." Emily felt her stomach turn. That letter was from almost 20 years ago, but the father's pain and anxiety were palpable even after so much time. She opened another envelope from a later date. "Mr. Richard, This is the third time I've written without a response. My daughter's wedding has already happened without the promised wine. She was devastated, and I feel humiliated in front of the whole family for having trusted you. I demand the return of my money, or I will take the necessary legal measures. David Morrison. Emily's hands trembled as she read. She opened another letter, this one dated 6 months after the previous. Richard Thompson, I discovered your phone has been disconnected and that you disappeared from the city. My daughter no longer speaks to me because of the humiliation I suffered at her wedding. I lost $5,000 that were all our savings, but I lost something much more valuable, my own daughter's trust. May God forgive you because I never will. David Morrison. Tears streamed down Emily's face. She could feel that man's pain, the frustration of being deceived at such an important moment. And if there were hundreds of similar letters down there, how many other people had been harmed by the previous owner? She spent the night reading correspondence. Each letter told a story of hope turned into disappointment. Families who had ordered special wines for wedding anniversaries, graduations, births, retirements, all had something in common: upfront payment, grand promises, and products never delivered. There were letters from restaurants that had placed large orders for special events, small merchants who wanted to resell the wines, even a letter from a retirement home that had ordered wine for a beloved resident's 90th birthday party. When the sun began to rise over the Napa Valley Mountains, Emily had read nearly 50 letters and was emotionally devastated. How could someone be so cruel? How could they take money from honest people and simply disappear with everything? The children woke up finding their mother still sitting at the kitchen table, surrounded by opened envelopes, and with red eyes from crying so much. "Mom, what happened?" James approached, worried. "Nothing serious, my love. I'm just learning a bit about this house's history." Emily didn't want to worry the children, but she knew she had to make a difficult decision. How could she build a life in that place, knowing all the suffering that had been caused there? At the same time, how could she simply ignore all those people who had been harmed? She prepared breakfast in silence, watching the children play in the backyard through the foggy kitchen windows. Emma had found an abandoned kitten and was trying to coax it closer with breadcrumbs. The twins were exploring a small shed at the back of the property, while James helped organize the things they had brought. They were good kids who had lost their father too early and now depended entirely on her to rebuild their lives. They deserved stability, security, a real home. But how could she give that to them while carrying the weight of so many past injustices? The realtor had mentioned that the property was being sold well below market value due to some complications he hadn't properly explained. Now Emily was beginning to understand what those complications were. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. She decided she needed to go to the nearest town to better understand the situation. She left the children playing in the backyard and drove her old van along the winding roads of the valley until she reached the center of St. Helena. The town buzzed with the typical activity of the wine region. Tourists strolled along the main streets while local producers offered tastings of their wines. Emily parked in front of the county clerk's office and entered, determined to find out more about the property she had bought. The clerk, a middle-aged man with reading glasses, became visibly uncomfortable when she mentioned having bought the old winery of Richard Thompson. "You bought that property?" he asked with a genuine expression of surprise. "Yes, through the Carter and Associates Realty." "Why? Is there a problem?" "Well, not exactly a legal problem, but that property has a complicated history in town. Richard Thompson disappeared almost 20 years ago, leaving many debts and many people harmed." Emily's heart sank. What kind of debts? Mainly with clients who had paid in advance for wines that were never delivered. There were even some attempts at lawsuits, but since he vanished without a trace, nothing was ever resolved. The property has been abandoned all this time. And the debts? Were they transferred to the new owner? No, his personal debts don't automatically pass to whoever buys the property, but you might face other kinds of problems. What problems? The clerk hesitated before answering. The reputation. Many people in the region still remember what happened. It might be difficult to establish business or gain the neighbors' trust. Emily left the county clerk's office with even more questions than answers. She decided to walk through the town to get to know better the place where she might raise her children. The streets were clean and cozy, with that typical small-town atmosphere that always calmed her. She went into a small bakery to buy bread for the children and ended up chatting with the owner, an Italian lady with graying hair and a warm smile. "Are you new in town?" the lady asked with a kind accent. "I just bought a property here in the region, a winery." The lady's expression changed immediately. "Don't tell me it was that one from Richard Thompson." Emily nodded, already expecting another negative reaction. Madonna mia! That man brought so much sadness to so many families. "Did you know the story?" "I'm starting to discover it. I found many unopened letters at the property." The Italian woman leaned closer and lowered her voice as if sharing a secret. "My own family was harmed by him. My brother-in-law had ordered special wine for his son's graduation party. He paid $3,000 in cash, which at the time was a lot of money for our family. Richard disappeared 1 week before the party." "I'm sorry." "It wasn't just the money, dear. It was the humiliation. My brother-in-law had promised the guests it would be a special, different wine. When he didn't arrive, he had to serve common market wine. He was never the same after that. He developed trust issues, always thinking people were laughing behind his back." Emily felt the weight of responsibility grow on her shoulders. These weren't just numbers in old letters. They were real people, real families who had been deeply affected by the actions of the former owner. "Do you know where I can find your brother-in-law? I'd like to speak with him." The Italian woman looked at her in surprise. "Why do you want to talk to him?" "I feel I need to understand better what happened. Maybe there's something I can do." "He still lives here in town, but be careful, dear. It's still a very painful subject for him. He doesn't like to talk about it." Emily wrote down the address and returned to the winery with her mind buzzing with thoughts. The children ran to greet her, eager to show the discoveries they had made during her absence. "Mom, we found more letters." Noah pulled her hand toward the back shed. "And a box full of papers," Ethan added excitedly. In the shed, they had found an old wooden table covered with yellow documents. There were contracts, receipts, handwritten notes, and more correspondence. A true documentation of the fraudulent business Richard Thompson had operated. Emily examined the papers while the children played in the yard. The contracts were all very similar, promises of unique and special wines with exaggerated descriptions about aging processes and extraordinary qualities. The prices were always high, and payment was always required in full up front. In some handwritten notes, she could see the man's calculating mind. He noted which customers were wealthier, which seemed more desperate, which had important events approaching. They were cold and cruel notes about people who trusted him. A separate folder contained bank receipts showing deposits of large sums. From what she could quickly calculate, Richard had collected over $200,000 just in the 2 years before disappearing. A fortune for that time. That night, after the children fell asleep, Emily returned to the basement to read more letters. She had decided she would read them all one by one to fully understand the dimension of what had happened there. One letter particularly struck her. It was from a woman named Margaret Carter from Sonoma. "Mr. Richard, I am a 78-year-old woman and have lived alone since my husband passed away 2 years ago. I decided to use all my accumulated pension to order special wines to distribute as Christmas gifts for my children and grandchildren. It was $1,500, all I had saved. You promised they would be unique wines that my family would never forget. Now Christmas has passed, my children went without the gifts I promised, and I can no longer even pay for my high blood pressure medicine. Please respond to me, Margaret Carter." Emily cried reading that letter. An elderly woman spending her entire pension to make her family happy at Christmas and being cruelly deceived. The image of the woman waiting for a response that never came, possibly dying without seeing her money returned, tore her apart. There were letters from simple people, workers who had saved month after month to buy something special. There were letters from small business owners who wanted to impress important clients. There were even letters from other smaller wineries that wanted business partnerships and had sent products as samples. Each letter represented not just lost money, but broken dreams, strained relationships, destroyed trust. And now she was living at the epicenter of all that pain. The next morning she made a decision. I couldn't simply ignore all that and move forward as if nothing had happened. I needed to do something, even if it meant sacrificing my own plans. First, I would try to find some of the people mentioned in the letters to apologize on behalf of the former owner and perhaps offer some kind of compensation. I knew it would be financially difficult, but I felt it was the right thing to do. I started with David Morrison, the father who had lost his daughter's trust because of the undelivered wine for the wedding. In the letters, he mentioned living in New York, but perhaps he still had relatives in the area. I called the only David Morrison winery listed in the St. Helena phone directory, but the number was out of service. Then I tried a more direct approach. I went to the city's post office and asked if anyone knew the Morrison family who had lived there 20 years ago. The postal worker, a middle-aged woman, thought for a moment before answering. Morrison is a common last name, but I remember a David who worked at the producers' cooperative here in town. If it's the same person, he moved to San Francisco after some financial problems. Do you know where I can find him? I'm not sure if he's still alive, but he had a brother who continued living here, Manuel Morrison. He lives on a small farm on the outskirts of town. Emily Carter wrote down the information and decided to try her luck. She left the children with a friendly neighbor who had offered to help and drove to the farm. The property was modest but well kept. Small vines stretched across the slopes, and a simple wooden house stood in the center of the land. An elderly man was pruning the vines when she arrived. "Mr. Manuel Morrison?" she asked, approaching carefully. The man stopped working and looked at her curiously. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" "My name is Emily Carter. I recently bought the old winery from Richard Thompson and found some old letters. One of them was from your brother David." The man's expression changed completely. His face hardened and he tightened his grip on the pruning shears. "David died 3 years ago, and if you're here to collect anything related to that scoundrel Richard, you can leave right now." "No, sir. Actually, I came to apologize." Manuel looked at her confused. "Apologize for what?" For what the former owner did to your family." "I read the letters David wrote. I know about the daughter's wedding, about the lost money, about their relationship that was damaged." The man lowered the shears and studied her for a long moment. "You read David's letters?" "Yes. And many other people's too. I'm trying to understand what happened and maybe do something to ease the suffering that was caused." Manuel sat on a small wooden stool beside the vines and gestured for her to come closer. David's daughter never spoke to him again after that wedding. She believed her father had made up the story about the special wine just to impress the guests, and then didn't have the courage to admit he didn't have the money. David tried to explain 1,000 times what really happened, but she never believed him. "And you? Did you believe him?" "Of course I did. I knew my brother. He was an honest, hard-working man. He would never make up a story like that. But I couldn't convince my niece of that." Emily felt a lump in her throat. "What's her name? Where does she live?" "Patricia Morrison Hayes. She lives in New York, but she still has the same last name because she separated from her husband a few years ago. Why do you want to know?" "I'd like to talk to her, show her her father's letters, explain what really happened." Manuel studied her again, as if trying to determine if she was sincere. "Do you really intend to do that? Aren't you just trying to clear the name of the property you bought?" "Mr. Manuel, I have 4 young children to raise alone. I invested all my savings in that property without knowing its history. I could simply pretend I know nothing and move on with my life, but I can't. Every time I look at my children, I think of the suffering that place caused other families." The man remained silent for several minutes, apparently weighing his words. "Patricia works at an accounting firm in New York. I can try to get her phone number, but I can't guarantee she'll want to talk about it. It's a wound that never properly healed." "I understand. Any information you can give me will be very valuable." Manuel went into the house and returned with an old address book. He wrote down some information on a piece of paper and handed it to Emily. "If you can truly make peace between her and her father's memory, it would be the best thing anyone could do for the Morrison family." Emily thanked him and returned home with a mix of hope and nervousness. She knew she was getting involved in a situation that could consume all her energy and financial resources, but she felt she had no moral choice. The children greeted her excitedly, full of stories about the afternoon they had spent with Mrs. Dorothy, the neighbor. Emma had received a handmade corn husk doll, and the boys had learned to make kites from old newspapers. "Mom, Mrs. Dorothy said she can teach us how to plant a vegetable garden." James was thrilled with the idea. "And she has chickens. Can I have a chicken?" Emma jumped with excitement. Emily smiled, seeing her children's joy. Perhaps it was possible to build a good life there, even carrying the weight of the past. But first, she needed to resolve the issues that were tormenting her. That night, after the children fell asleep, she called the number Manuel had given her. A woman's voice answered after several rings. "Hello, Patricia Morrison Hayes?" "Yes. Who is this?" "My name is Emily Carter. I'm the new owner of the winery where your father ordered wine for your wedding 20 years ago." There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "How did you get my number?" "Through your uncle Manuel. Patricia, I know it's a painful subject, but I need to talk to you about what really happened back then." "I have nothing to talk about regarding that. My father made up a story to cover up that he didn't have money to buy expensive wine. End of conversation. Patricia, please. I have the original letters your father wrote. I have the payment receipts. I can prove he was telling the truth." Another silence, longer this time. "What letters?" 3 letters he wrote to the winery owner, demanding the delivery of the wine or the return of the money. They're dated and signed by him. I also have other documents showing that the previous owner cheated hundreds of people in the same way. Patricia's voice trembled when she responded. "That's impossible. I can send scanned copies by email if you'd like, or I can bring them personally to New York." You would do that?" "I would. Your father was innocent, Patricia, and he suffered greatly because you didn't believe him." Patricia began to cry on the other end of the line. I said terrible things to him. I accused him of lying, of trying to deceive me. Our relationship was never the same after that. There's still time to honor his memory, to understand what kind of man he really was. When can you come here?" Emily arranged the trip to New York for the following weekend. She left the children with Mrs. Dorothy, who had already become a sort of adoptive grandmother to them, and took a bus from the St. Helena bus station. The journey gave her time to reflect on what she was doing. She was spending money she barely had, leaving her children with someone she had known for just a few days, to meet a stranger and show letters that might only reopen old wounds. But she knew it was necessary. She couldn't live in peace on that property, knowing she could have helped resolve at least one of the past injustices. Patricia was waiting for her at a cafe in downtown New York. She was a woman of about 40, with brown hair and eyes that still showed signs of sleepless nights. She seemed nervous, constantly stirring a cup of coffee that was getting cold. "Did you bring the letters?" she asked as soon as Emily sat down. "I did. But before I show them, I want you to tell me your version of the story." Patricia took a deep breath before beginning. "I was 22 when I got married. My father was always a simple man, worked at the cooperative and earned little. When he said he had ordered a special and very expensive wine for my wedding, I thought it was strange because I knew we couldn't afford it. What happened on the wedding day? He arrived at the church saying there was a problem with the wine, that it might not arrive in time. He suggested we buy something ordinary at the store so we wouldn't run out. I was furious. I thought he had made up the story about the special wine just to impress my family and my husband's family. And then we argued a lot. I said I was tired of his empty promises, that he always wanted to appear more than we really had. He tried to explain about the supplier who had disappeared, but I didn't believe him. I thought it was just another excuse." Patricia stopped to wipe away the tears that had started to fall. "We kept in touch, but it was never the same. There was always tension between us. He died 3 years ago from a heart attack, and one of the last things he told me was that one day I would discover the truth about that wine." Emily took the letters out of her bag and placed them on the table. Patricia picked them up with trembling hands and began to read. The first letter was cordial, almost friendly. David explained that the wedding was approaching and asked about the delivery status. The second, written 2 weeks later, was more concerned. The third, sent after the wedding, was desperate and full of pain. "My God," Patricia whispered after reading the last letter. "He had actually paid for the wines. He was telling the truth all along. And it wasn't just your father. Look at this." Emily showed several other letters demonstrating that the pattern was always the same: honest people being deceived by an unscrupulous man. "How could I be so cruel to him?" Patricia was sobbing now. "You were young and didn't have the information. Anyone in your situation could have reacted the same way. But I should have trusted him. He was my father. He had never lied to me before. Patricia, your father loved you. Reading these letters, I can see how desperate he was, not about the lost money, but about you not believing him. The last time we spoke, he said he forgave me for everything. I didn't understand it at the time, but now I do. He forgave me for not trusting him." The two women sat in silence for a few minutes, each processing the emotions of the moment. "What are you going to do now?" Patricia finally asked. "I'm going to try to find other people from the letters, see if I can do something to ease the suffering that was caused. That's going to cost you a lot of money." "Probably, but I can't just ignore all this and move on." Patricia studied her with admiration. "Do you have children?" "4. All young. And you're still doing this?" "Maybe because of them. I want them to grow up knowing that the right thing isn't always the easiest." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Patricia insisted on paying for lunch and gave Emily an envelope before they said goodbye. "What's this?" $500. "I know it's not much, but I want to contribute to what you're doing. My father would be proud knowing someone is trying to seek justice in his name." "Patricia, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do. It's the first good thing I can do for my father's memory in 20 years. The trip back to Napa Valley was emotional. Emily felt relieved to have clarified at least one of the situations, but also overwhelmed by the magnitude of the task she had set out to accomplish. The children welcomed her with joy, and 1,000 stories about the days they had spent with Mrs. Dorothy. The neighbor had taught Emma how to make homemade bread. The twins had helped tend the vegetable garden, and James had fixed a broken gate in the backyard. "They were angels," Mrs. Dorothy told Emily. "If you need to go out again, you can leave them with me without worry." That night, Emily returned to the basement to continue reading the letters. Now that she had seen firsthand the positive impact she could make, she felt more motivated to continue. One letter particularly caught her attention. It was from a woman named Joan Anderson from Calistoga, who had ordered wines for her husband's retirement party. The date of the letter was just 6 months before Richard's disappearance. What intrigued her was the tone of the letter. Joan didn't just seem desperate for the wine delivery. She seemed to know Richard personally, mentioning previous conversations and intimate details about the family's financial situation. "Richard, you know how important this party is to me. John worked 40 years at the same company, and I promised the whole family it would be a special celebration. You said the wines would be unique, that there was a special story behind them. I trusted you not just as a supplier, but as a friend. Please don't let me down like... well, you know what I'm talking about." That last sentence piqued Emily's curiosity. There seemed to be a personal history between Joan and Richard that went beyond a simple business relationship. She decided her next investigation would be to find Joan Anderson. Calistoga was a small town. It would be easier to locate information there. The next morning, she left the children playing in the yard under James's care, who at 12 already showed enough maturity to look after his siblings for a few hours, and drove to Calistoga. The town was even smaller than St. Helena, with that familiar small-town atmosphere where everyone knows each other. She stopped at a bakery to ask about the Anderson family. "Joan Anderson? Of course I know her," said the baker, an Italian lady with rosy cheeks. "She lives here on Main Street, the yellow house with the green gate. But be careful, she doesn't like to talk much about certain subjects." "What kind of subjects?" The baker lowered her voice and leaned over the counter. "Old problems with a wine supplier. Her husband John died a few years ago without seeing the retirement party she had planned. She became very bitter about it. Emily's heart raced. If John had passed away without his retirement party, the situation was even more tragic than she had imagined. She found the house easily. It was a simple but well-kept building, with flowers in the windows and a small garden in front. A white-haired woman was watering the plants as she approached. "Mrs. Joan Anderson." The woman looked up and studied her curiously. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" "My name is Emily Carter. I bought the old winery from Richard Thompson and found a letter of yours among the unopened correspondence." Joan's face completely transformed. The friendly expression vanished, replaced by a mix of pain and anger. "I don't want to talk about it." "Mrs. Anderson, please. I know it's painful, but I'm trying to understand what happened to maybe do something to ease—" "Ease?" Joan interrupted her with a trembling voice. "My husband died without having the party I had promised him. He died thinking I hadn't managed to organize something special for him after 40 years of hard work. I'm sorry." "You're sorry, but you don't understand. John was sick. The doctors had said he had few months left. The retirement party would be our last celebration together. I wanted it to be perfect." Emily felt tears forming in her eyes. What exactly happened? Joan sighed deeply and gestured for Emily to sit on a plastic chair in the garden. "Richard wasn't just my supplier. We had a relationship for a few years." The confession left Emily surprised, but she tried not to show judgment. "Did John know?" "John was too sick to notice anything. Richard would come here often saying he was separating from his wife, that after he sorted out some financial problems, we could be together officially." "And the party?" "When I found out John had only a few months to live, I wanted to do something special. Richard offered to provide unique wines, said it would be his contribution to our future life together. I paid $3,000, which was almost all of my emergency savings. And then? John died 2 weeks before the party. Richard disappeared 3 days after the funeral. He left a note saying he had decided to start a new life elsewhere." Joan began to cry silently. "I lost my husband, I lost my money, I lost the man I thought loved me, and I still had to explain to the whole family why the party had been cancelled. It was the darkest period of my life." "Mrs. Anderson, I'm so sorry. I didn't know the situation was so complicated. What hurts me the most is that I believed him, not just about the wines, but about everything, about us moving together somewhere else, about starting a new life. I was a fool." Emily stayed silent for a few moments, processing everything she had heard. "Do you still have the payment receipts?" "I have everything stored in a box. Why?" "Because maybe I can at least return your money. I can't undo what happened, but I can try to fix at least the financial part." Joan looked at her in disbelief. "You would do that?" "I would. You didn't deserve to go through all that." "But you're not responsible for his actions." "No, but now I'm living on the property where all this happened. I feel I have a moral responsibility." Joan brought a shoebox full of documents, receipts, handwritten notes from Richard, even some photos of the two together in happier times. "You can keep it all. I don't want anything that reminds me of him anymore." Emily put the documents in her bag and took out her checkbook. $3,000, correct? "Emily, you don't need to do this now. I know you must have your own financial difficulties." "Mrs. Anderson, you lost much more than money. It's the least I can do." As she wrote the check, Emily mentally calculated the impact on the family budget. But she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep peacefully, knowing she could help and hadn't done anything. "Why are you doing this for people you don't even know?" Joan asked, watching Emily fill out the check. "I have 4 young children. I lost my husband 2 years ago and I'm trying to rebuild our life. I know how hard it is to trust again after being let down. Maybe by doing this for you, I'm also healing something in myself." Joan accepted the check with tears in her eyes. "May God bless you and your children." The drive home was emotionally heavy. Emily had spent a significant amount of money but felt at peace with her decision. At the same time, she began to realize that if she decided to help all the people from the letters, she would quickly run out of resources. She needed to find a more sustainable way to repair the damages of the past. Perhaps she could start some kind of business at the winery that would generate funds to compensate the victims gradually. When she got home, she found the children helping Mrs. Dorothy prepare grape jam with fruits they had harvested on the property. "Mom, look how many grapes were on the vines." Emma's hands were purple from handling the fruit. "And Mrs. Dorothy said they can become wine," Noah added excitedly. Emily watched her children working happily and had an idea. Maybe the solution was right in front of her eyes. She could really try making wines on the property, but honest wines, with real quality, sold at fair prices. "Mrs. Dorothy, do you know how to make wine?" "A little, dear. My late husband made homemade wine for many years. It's nothing professional, but I know the basics. Would you like to teach me? In return, we can split the profits if we manage to sell anything." Mrs. Dorothy smiled broadly. "It would be an honor to help you, dear, but it will be a lot of work. Work doesn't scare me, and I have 4 very willing helpers." That night, Emily devised a plan. She would continue reading the letters and trying to locate the harmed people, but in parallel, she would start developing a legitimate business at the winery. The profits from this business would be used to gradually compensate Richard's victims. It was an ambitious and risky plan, but it seemed the most sustainable way to do justice without financially destroying her own family. She spent the next 2 weeks learning about viticulture with Mrs. Dorothy and some neighbors who offered to help. The local community seemed willing to give the new owner a chance, especially when they learned of her efforts to repair the damages of the past. During this period, she continued reading the letters from the basement. One situation she discovered left her particularly outraged. Richard had cheated St. Clair Retirement Home, an institution that cared for abandoned elderly people. The nun in charge, Sister Catherine, had written several letters explaining that they had saved for months to buy special wines for the 90th birthday party of a very beloved resident. She was a lady who had been abandoned by her family and considered the staff at the home as her only family. The letters showed how the party had been planned with care, how everyone was looking forward to seeing the elderly woman's joy, and how devastated they were when the wines never arrived. The last letter mentioned that the lady had passed away shortly after the failed party, and that one of her last concerns had been understanding why no one had cared enough to make her party special. Emily cried reading those letters, an elderly woman spending her last moments thinking she wasn't important enough to deserve a proper celebration. It was a cruelty that crossed any acceptable boundary. She decided that St. Clair Retirement Home would be her next priority. She called there and managed to speak with Sister Catherine, who still worked at the institution. "Sister, my name is Emily Carter. I'm the current owner of the winery that had promised wines to you 20 years ago." "Oh, my child, that's a very sad story. Why are you calling about this now?" "I found the letters you wrote. Letters that were never opened by the previous owner. Sister, I'd like to visit them and perhaps do something to make up for what happened." "My child, Mrs. Hope, who was supposed to win the party, passed away many years ago." "I know, sister. But maybe we can honor her memory and at the same time do something special for the current residents." Sister Catherine remained silent for a few moments. "Would you really come all the way here?" "I would. And I'd bring some real bottles of wine, made with care at the same property that should have supplied the original wines. That would be a blessing, my child." The retirement home was in Yountville, about an hour's drive from the winery. Emily carefully prepared some bottles of the wine she had produced with Mrs. Dorothy's help. It wasn't a sophisticated wine, but it was honest and made with love. The institution was simple but clean and cozy. Elderly people sitting on the porch waved as she arrived, carrying a basket of wines. Sister Catherine greeted her with a warm smile. "So glad you came, my child. Our residents have been curious about your visit." Emily told the elderly gathered in the main room about the history of the property, about the letters she found, and about her decision to try to repair the damages of the past. Many were moved hearing about Mrs. Hope and the party that never happened. "So, in memory of Mrs. Hope and all of you who deserve to be celebrated every day, I'd like to offer these wines so we can have a party right now." The impromptu party was touching. The elderly shared stories from their youth. Some sang old songs, others danced to rhythms they could keep up with. Emily's wine was praised as the tastiest they'd ever had, though she knew affection seasons any flavor. Before leaving, Sister Catherine pulled her aside. "My child, what you did today was far more valuable than those wines that never arrived 20 years ago. You brought joy and, more importantly, you brought dignity. You showed that these people matter. Sister, I'd like to make a proposal. What if I committed to providing wines for all the residents' important celebrations, birthdays, holidays, special dates, at no cost?" "You would really do that?" "I would, and more. I'd like you to tell me about the residents who don't receive visitors. Maybe we can organize some extra celebrations for them." Sister Catherine hugged Emily with tears in her eyes. "God put you in our path, my child." The drive back home was invigorating. For the first time since finding the letters, Emily felt truly optimistic about her ability to make a difference. She was beginning to understand that she might not be able to return the money to everyone, but she could create meaningful experiences that honored the dignity of the people who were harmed. The children greeted her eagerly, wanting to hear about the visit to the retirement home. They were delighted by the elderly's stories and asked to accompany her on her next visit. "Mom, can we take Emma to sing for them?" James suggested. "She sings beautifully." "And I can make drawings," Noah added. "We can put on a play." Ethan didn't want to be left out. Emily realized that her children were learning important values through this entire experience. They were seeing in practice what it means to care about other people and to act when you can make a difference. During the following weeks, she established a routine of working at the winery in the morning and investigating the letters at night. The wine business was starting to succeed. Mrs. Dorothy had introduced some local buyers, and the reputation for honesty that Emily was building generated genuine interest in the products. One day she received an unexpected visit. A middle-aged man, well-dressed, stopped in front of the property and observed the new sign she had put up, "New Beginning Winery, Honest Wines of Napa Valley." "Are you the new owner?" he asked when she came out to greet him. "Yes, I am. Emily Carter. How can I help you?" "My name is Dr. Frederick Anderson. I'm a lawyer in San Francisco. I'm representing some clients who were harmed by the previous owner of this winery." Emily's heart raced. Was she about to face lawsuits for crimes she hadn't committed? "What kind of representation?" "Nothing against you, you can relax. In fact, we heard about your efforts to compensate Richard Thompson's victims. Some of my clients would like to meet you in person." "Your clients were harmed by him too?" "Yes, and they found out through Patricia Morrison Hayes that you're trying to make things right. They'd like to discuss a proposal that could benefit everyone." "What kind of proposal?" Dr. Frederick took a briefcase from his car. "My clients are willing to invest in your winery in exchange for a share of the profits. The investment would be used not only to improve the business, but also to create a compensation fund for other victims." Emily was surprised. "Why would they do that?" "Because they saw that you're different. Instead of simply ignoring the past, you're facing the situation head-on. That has generated trust." "And who are these clients?" "Local business people who were harmed at different times. One of them owns a restaurant chain that had ordered wines for an important opening. Another has an event company that lost credibility with clients because of the wines that weren't delivered. The proposal was tempting, but Emily knew she needed to think carefully. "Dr. Frederick, can I have a few days to consider the proposal?" "Of course, but I'd like you to know that it's not just about business. These people truly believe in what you're doing and want to be part of it." That evening, Emily talked with Mrs. Dorothy about the proposal. The neighbor, who had become her main advisor, was cautious but optimistic. "It sounds like a good opportunity, dear, but you need to make sure you won't lose control of the property. It's your children's future at stake." "I think about that too. But if I can get resources to really help all those people from the letters..." "You're already helping, dear. Maybe not with money for everyone, but with dignity and recognition. Sometimes that's worth more than any amount in dollars." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. She decided to schedule a meeting with Dr. Frederick and his clients to better understand the terms of the proposal. The meeting took place at the winery itself, on a sunny Saturday morning. 3 men attended besides the lawyer. The first was Michael Carson, owner of a restaurant chain called Valley Flavors. The second, Richard Fernandez, had a corporate events company. The third introduced himself simply as Paul Carter, without initially explaining his area of work. "Mrs. Carter, before we talk business, we'd like to know more about your story," said Michael. "Why did you decide to get involved with the problems caused by Richard Thompson?" Emily told her journey from purchasing the property to her current efforts to compensate the victims. The men listened attentively, asking specific questions about her decision-making process and motivations. "What impresses me most is your willingness to sacrifice your own resources for people you didn't even know," commented Richard. "That's rare in the business world." "I don't see it as a sacrifice," Emily Carter answered honestly. "I see it as a responsibility. I'm living in a place where a lot of suffering was caused. I can't just pretend it didn't happen." Paul Carter, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. "Mrs. Carter, I don't know if Dr. Frederick mentioned it, but I was also a victim of Richard Thompson, just in a slightly different way." "How so?" "I was his partner in the early years of the winery. I invested all my savings in the business, believing we were building something honest and lasting. The revelation left everyone surprised, including Dr. Frederick." "What happened?" Emily asked. "Richard started accepting orders he knew he couldn't fulfill. When I questioned him about it, he said it was just a temporary strategy to get working capital. I ended up discovering he was using the client's money for personal expenses. And then I tried to convince him to stop this scheme and honor the commitments. He pretended to agree, but he was actually planning to disappear with all the accumulated money. He vanished one early morning, leaving a letter saying I was responsible for all the company's debts." Emily felt a knot in her stomach. "Did you lose a lot of money?" "I lost everything. House, car, emergency savings. I had to start over from scratch in another state. I only returned to the region a few years ago after I managed to rebuild my financial life. And why are you willing to invest in the winery now?" Paul smiled sadly. "Because I see in you the person I wish I had been 20 years ago. Someone willing to face problems instead of running away from them." The meeting continued with discussions about the terms of the investment. The 3 businessmen were willing to invest a total of $100,000 in the winery in exchange for 30% of future profits. $50,000 would be used to improve the infrastructure and increase production, and the other $50,000 would form a specific fund to compensate the victims. "And if the profits aren't enough to recover your investment?" Emily asked. "We're willing to take that risk," Michael answered. "We believe in your character and the property's potential." "Besides, it's not just about money," Richard complimented. "If we can turn this property into a symbol of integrity in the region, we'll all benefit in terms of reputation." Dr. Frederick prepared a preliminary contract that gave Emily time to study all the clauses carefully. The proposal really seemed fair and beneficial for everyone involved. That night, after the children fell asleep, Emily sat in the backyard of the house watching the stars and thinking about everything that had happened in the last few months. She had left San Francisco as a desperate widow trying to start over, and now she was becoming the center of a historical reparation movement in Napa Valley. It was a heavy responsibility, but it made her feel useful in a way she had never experienced before. Her children were learning important values. She was making a difference in the lives of real people. And on top of that, she was building a business that could secure the family's future. She decided to accept the investor's proposal. The contract signing took place in the presence of Mrs. Dorothy and the children, who already considered the new partners as part of the extended family. James, always concerned with practical matters, asked if this meant they wouldn't have to worry about money anymore. "It means we'll have more resources to help people and make the winery grow," Emily explained. "But we'll still need to work hard." "Can I keep helping in the garden?" Emma wanted to know. "Of course you can. All of you will keep helping. This is our family, our home, our project." With the investment, Emily was able to significantly speed up the process of compensating the victims. She created a methodology to prioritize the cases. First, people in socially vulnerable situations. Second, cases where the emotional impact had been more severe. Third, absolute values lost. One of the stories that touched her the most was that of Mr. Benedict, a small rural producer who had sold his last head of cattle to pay in advance for special wines for his only daughter's wedding. The celebration had taken place without the promised wines, and the daughter had moved to New York shortly after the wedding, apparently ashamed of the family's financial situation. Mr. Benedict had never spoken about that episode again, but the neighbors said he had developed a deep distrust of any kind of business. He had spent the last 20 years working only with barter or cash payments, refusing any transaction that involved future promises. Emily decided she would compensate Mr. Benedict not only financially, but also by helping to organize a new party to celebrate his daughter's 20th wedding anniversary. With the help of the new partners, she managed to locate the daughter in New York and convince her to accept the invitation to a surprise party. Organizing the party was a project that involved the whole community. Mrs. Dorothy coordinated the cooking, Emily's children prepared handmade decorations, and even Sister Catherine brought some residents from St. Clair Retirement Home to join the celebration. Mr. Benedict was moved to see his daughter arriving unexpectedly, accompanied by her husband and 2 grandchildren he barely knew. The party was filled with the best wines Emily had produced up to that point, and included a speech where she explained the historical compensation being made. "Mr. Benedict, you were deceived by someone who didn't deserve your trust," she said in front of all the guests. "Today we are here to say that there are honest people in the world, and your daughter has every reason to be proud of the father she has." Mr. Benedict's daughter, who had avoided talking about the subject for 20 years, finally apologized to her father for being ashamed of the family's financial situation. "Dad, I was young and foolish. I didn't understand that you had been the victim of a scam. I thought we were too poor to dream big." "Daughter, we were never poor in character," Mr. Benedict replied with tears in his eyes. "That's what matters." The party lasted until dawn, with stories being told, memories shared, and relationships repaired. It was one of the most rewarding experiences Emily had had since arriving in Napa Valley. The following months passed quickly. The winery was thriving beyond expectations, the children were adapting to life in the countryside and making friends at the local school, and the historical compensation project was gaining recognition throughout the region. One day, Emily received a call that would change the course of her story once again. "Hello, Mrs. Emily. This is Detective Charles Mitchell from the Sonoma Civil Police." Her heart raced. "Yes, how can I help you?" "Are you indeed the owner of the former winery of Richard Thompson?" "Yes, I am." "Has something happened?" "Richard Thompson has been found." Emily nearly dropped the phone. "And what do you mean?" "He was living under a false identity in Texas. He was arrested for running the same type of scam on rural producers in the area. During the interrogation, he confessed to the crimes committed here in Napa Valley 20 years ago." "And now?" "Now he can be prosecuted for all the old crimes. The thing is, we learned about the work you're doing to compensate the victims, and we wanted to talk about how to proceed. What does this mean for the people who were harmed?" "It means they can try to recover the money through the legal system. Richard still possesses some assets that could be seized for compensation." The news was surprising and at the same time disturbing. On one hand, there was finally a chance for real justice for the victims. On the other, Emily knew that legal proceedings could drag on for years, and many of the affected people were elderly who might not live to see the resolution. She decided she would continue with her compensation project regardless of the legal processes. Bureaucratic justice had its value, but the immediate human justice she was providing was equally important. Richard Thompson's arrest brought unexpected media attention to the winery. Journalists from San Francisco and even from New York came to cover the story of the widow who turned injustice into hope. Emily initially hesitated to speak with the press, preferring to keep the focus on the work rather than the publicity, but her partners convinced her that the exposure could be beneficial for business and also for inspiring others to take similar actions in their communities. The first interview was for a local radio program. Emily was nervous, but she managed to convey her motivations and goals sincerely. "Mrs. Carter, what motivated you to take responsibility for crimes you didn't commit?" asked the interviewer. "I don't think I took responsibility for the crimes. I think I took responsibility for the healing. When you live in a place where injustices have occurred, you have two options: ignore the past or try to make amends. I chose to try to make amends. And weren't you afraid of risking your children's future? I was very afraid, but I also realized what kind of example I wanted to set for them. I wanted them to know that when you can make a difference in other people's lives, you do it, even if it's difficult. The interview had a positive impact, generating wine orders from various parts of California. People wanted to support the cause by buying products from the winery that was doing justice. The sales growth allowed the compensation process to accelerate even further. Emily set an ambitious goal. By the end of the year, she wanted to have located and compensated all the people mentioned in the letters found in the basement. One of the last investigations led her to discover a particularly complex situation. There were several letters from a company called United Family Distribution, which had apparently placed very large orders for wines for resale. The letters showed that the company had paid almost $20,000 in advance for wines that were to be distributed to smaller markets in the region. When the products weren't delivered, United Family Distribution apparently went bankrupt, leaving its own customers without the products they had ordered. It was a cascading situation that had harmed not only the distributor, but dozens of small businesses that depended on it to stock their shelves during the holiday season. Investigating further, Emily discovered that United Family Distribution was a family business run by two brothers, Walter and Gerald Harrison. After the bankruptcy caused by Richard's default, the brothers had fallen out and gone their separate ways. Walter had tried to start another business, but the reputation tarnished by the distributor's collapse made it difficult to get credit and suppliers. He ended up working as a sales representative for other companies, never managing to establish himself as an independent entrepreneur again. Gerald had left the region and opened a small market in a rural town where no one knew his history. He lived a simple but stable life, avoiding any kind of business that involved large investments or partnerships. The situation was delicate because the two brothers hadn't spoken in nearly 20 years, and any attempt at historical reparation would also have to address the strained family relationship. Emily decided to approach each brother separately first, to better understand the personal dynamics involved. She found Walter working as a representative for an agricultural equipment company in St. Helena. He was a man of about 60 with graying hair, who seemed to carry the weight of many disappointments in his stooped posture and tired gaze. "Are you Walter Harrison, former owner of United Family Distribution?" Walter looked at her with immediate suspicion. "Why do you want to know?" "I'm Emily Carter, owner of the winery that belonged to Richard Thompson. I found correspondence from your company about wines that weren't delivered." The man's expression transformed into a mixture of anger and sadness. "That damn man destroyed my life. He destroyed my family." "Would you like to talk about what happened?" "What for? It's in the past. There's no fixing it now." "Mr. Walter, I'm trying to compensate people who were harmed by Richard Thompson. Perhaps we can do something to help." "Ma'am, you don't understand. It wasn't just the money. It was the client's trust, the partnership with my brother, my reputation in the market. You can't compensate for those things with money." "You're right. But perhaps we can at least start to repair some things." Walter agreed to talk at a nearby cafe. For 2 hours, he detailed how the distributor's collapse had affected his personal and professional life. The worst part was the fight with Gerald. He blamed me for trusting Richard without sufficient guarantees, said I had been naive and irresponsible. Maybe he was right. "And you never spoke again?" "Once or twice a year at the kids' birthdays, but never again as brothers. Always with that tension in the air. Would you like to reconcile with him?" "I would, but I don't know if it's possible. 20 years of resentment don't fade easily." "Perhaps if he knew it wasn't your fault." "What do you mean?" "Mr. Walter, Richard Thompson was recently arrested for pulling similar scams in several places. Your brother might not have known that." Walter fell silent for several minutes, processing the information. "He was really arrested?" "Yes, and he confessed to all the old crimes, including the one that harmed your distributor." It means you were the victim of a professional criminal. not a naive businessman who made a bad decision. Tears began to stream down Walter's face. 20 years thinking it was my fault. It wasn't your fault, it was a crime. And now perhaps it's time to talk to your brother about this. The conversation with Gerald happened a few days later in the small country town where he lived. The market was modest but well organized, clearly run by someone who had learned to value stability over risky growth. Gerald physically resembled Walter, but had a more upright posture and a more determined gaze. He greeted customers with genuine cordiality, showing he had managed to rebuild a solid reputation in his new community. "Who are you?" he asked when Emily introduced herself. "Emily Carter. I bought the winery that belonged to Richard Thompson, and I'm trying to locate people who were harmed by him. Harmed is putting it mildly. That man destroyed 20 years of work in a few weeks. Would you like to talk about what happened?" "It's in the past, miss. I'd rather not stir up those memories. Mr. Gerald, your brother Walter still suffers greatly from what happened, and also from the fact that you've grown apart." Gerald's expression softened slightly. "How is he?" "Physically well, but carrying a lot of guilt. He thinks he was responsible for the company's failure. It was indeed irresponsible. He trusted too much, didn't demand sufficient guarantees." "Mr. Gerald, Richard Thompson was arrested a few weeks ago. They discovered he had been running scams professionally for decades. Your brother wasn't naive. He was a victim of an experienced criminal." Gerald stopped organizing the shelf merchandise and turned to look at her directly. "What do you mean?" Emily explained about the arrest, about the confessions, about the discovery that Richard had deceived hundreds of people, always using the same sophisticated methods. "Does this change anything in how you view what happened?" Gerald remained thoughtful for a long time. "Maybe it does. If he really was a professional criminal, he was. And your brother was just one of many victims. Walter was always more trusting than me. He believed more in people's goodness. Maybe I was unfair to him. It's never too late to talk about it. Do you think he would want to see me?" "I'm sure he would." The brothers' reunion was scheduled to take place at the winery on a Sunday afternoon. Emily thought it would be appropriate for the reconciliation to happen at the place where it all began, but now transformed into a symbol of reparation and hope. Walter arrived first, visibly nervous. He carried in his hand a bottle of wine he had bought especially for the occasion, unaware that at the winery they would have access to the best house wines. "Are you nervous?" Emily asked. "Very. I don't know what to say to him after so long." "Tell the truth. That you miss him, that you want to be his brother again. And if he doesn't want to? It doesn't hurt to try." Gerald arrived a few minutes later, driving a simple but well-maintained pickup truck. He got out of the vehicle and stood still for a moment, observing the property, perhaps remembering the times when he used to come there to pick up goods for the distribution company. The two brothers greeted each other with initial formality, but the contained emotion in their gazes was visible. "How are you, Gerald?" "Well, Walter. And you?" "Getting by." Emily invited them to sit at a table she had prepared in the backyard, overlooking the vines that were beginning to bud with the arrival of spring. "Walter, why don't you tell your brother about our conversation?" In a hesitant voice, Walter recounted the arrest of Richard, the revelations of the serial crimes, the realization that they had been victims of a professional scheme. "Gerald, you were right when you said I was naive. But maybe it wasn't just naivety. Maybe I fell into a well-prepared trap." Gerald listened in silence, nervously fiddling with a tablecloth. "Walter, I said very harsh things to you back then. I was angry, frustrated, scared. Maybe I was unfair. You had the right to be angry. We lost everything. But it wasn't your fault. If that man really was a professional criminal, any of us could have fallen for the scam." The two brothers remained silent for a few minutes, each lost in their own memories and regrets. "Walter, I missed you all these years," Gerald finally said. "I built a new life, but something was always missing. I always missed my brother." "I missed you too. I often wanted to call, to visit you, but didn't know how to start the conversation. How about we start now?" The two men embraced, crying like children who finally find a long-lost toy. Emily discreetly stepped away to give them privacy for the moment, feeling she had witnessed something very special. The afternoon passed with the brothers talking about the lost years, about the children who had grown up without really knowing their uncles, about the plans they had before the company went bankrupt, about the dreams they had kept for 2 decades. "Walter, have you ever thought about us working together again?" Gerald asked as the sun was setting. "Gerald, we're almost 60. Isn't it a bit late to start over?" "Maybe it's the right time. We have experience, we know where we went wrong in the past, and now we know it wasn't our fault." "But doing what?" "I don't know yet. Maybe something related to what Mrs. Emily is doing here. Helping people, fixing broken things." Emily, who had returned to say goodbye to them, overheard the conversation and had an idea. "May I make a suggestion?" "Of course, Mrs. Emily. How about you become my official distributors? I produce honest wines, you have experience in distribution, you know the local market. We could form a partnership." The brothers looked at each other with growing interest. "It would be a way to get back into the business we know, but now with real products," Walter said thoughtfully. "And it would be a way to honor the memory of United Family Distribution, only now with complete integrity," Gerald added. "We would need some startup capital to begin again," Walter considered. "I have a proposal for that too," Emily said. "Part of the compensation fund could be directed to help you set up the new distribution company. It would be an interest-free loan to be repaid as profits come in." "Would you really do that?" "I would. I believe you deserve a second chance, and I need reliable partners to expand the business." The partnership was formalized a few weeks later. The new United Family Distribution was born with the explicit purpose of working only with honest and transparent suppliers. The Harrison brothers became the first distributors of New Beginning Winery wines, bringing to all of Napa Valley not only quality products, but also the story of overcoming and repair that was happening at the property. The success of the partnership surprised even the most optimistic. The combination of the quality of the wines, the inspiring story of the winery, and the business experience of the Harrison brothers created a demand that soon exceeded production capacity. Emily found herself needing to quickly expand operations, hiring more employees and investing in better equipment. Mrs. Dorothy was promoted to production supervisor, a position she accepted with pride and responsibility. The children also became more actively involved in the business. James, who had turned 13, showed a natural talent for the technical aspects of viticulture. Noah and Ethan developed an interest in the commercial side, helping to organize client visits and promotional events. Emma, always creative, specialized in designing handmade labels that became a trademark of the special wines. The Victim Compensation Project continued alongside the growth of the business. By the end of the first year of operations, Emily had located and compensated over 80% of the people mentioned in the letters found in the basement. Some situations were particularly rewarding. Mrs. Margaret Carter, the elderly woman who had spent her entire pension to buy Christmas gifts for her family, was located in a retirement home in Sonoma. Despite her advanced age and some memory problems, she still remembered perfectly the episode of the undelivered wines. Emily organized an out-of-season Christmas party at the home, complete with special wines for Mrs. Margaret to distribute as gifts to her caregivers and companions. The joy of the elderly woman finally being able to perform the generous gesture she had planned 20 years earlier was moving for all present. "Now I can die in peace," she told Emily, gripping her hands with surprising strength for her age. "I managed to give the gifts I promised." Another memorable case was that of a young man who had written to Richard Thompson requesting special wines for his girlfriend's marriage proposal. The young man had saved for months, working 2 jobs to get the money, dreaming of a perfect and unique moment. When the wines didn't arrive, he ended up proposing without any special preparation in just any city square. The girlfriend said yes, but he always carried the frustration of not having created the magical moment he had planned. 20 years later, Emily located the couple, now with teenage children, and proposed a vow renewal with all the pomp the original proposal deserved. The celebration took place at the winery itself, with the house's best wines and an emotional ceremony where the husband was finally able to declare his love with the solemnity he had always wanted. "You know what's most beautiful about all this?" the wife told Emily during the party. "It's not the wines or the decorations. It's knowing that there are still people willing to fix things that weren't their fault." As the compensation stories spread through the region, the winery began receiving visitors from distant places, people who hadn't been directly harmed by Richard Thompson, but who wanted to see the place where this unique experience of historical reparation was happening. Emily decided to formalize these visits by creating a tourist itinerary that combined wine tasting with storytelling about the compensation project. Visitors left not only savoring good wines, but also inspired by the possibility of making a difference in their own communities. One of the most special visitor groups was a delegation of business people from San Francisco who were facing a similar situation. They had discovered that the founder of a cooperative they participated in had misappropriated funds for years, harming dozens of rural producer families. "Mrs. Carter, how did you manage to turn such a negative situation into something positive?" asked the delegation leader. "I think the secret is not trying to forget the past, but rather learning from it and using it to build a better future. Instead of running from responsibility, I took responsibility for healing. But it wasn't your responsibility. Perhaps not legal responsibility, but it was moral responsibility. When you have the ability to do good and don't, you're choosing to be part of the problem. And how do you convince others to participate? You don't need to convince, you need to set an example. When people see that it's possible to make a difference, they naturally want to participate." The delegation returned to San Francisco inspired, and several months later started a similar project, creating a fund to compensate the victims of the cooperative fraud. The project was named Reparation Network and began spreading to other cities in the state. Emily realized she had started something bigger than she imagined. It wasn't just about compensating the specific victims of Richard Thompson, but about demonstrating that it's possible to transform injustice into justice, suffering into hope, distrust into solidarity. The winery's second year of operation was marked by exponential growth in all aspects. Production tripled, the number of employees increased from 3 to 15 people, and the new United Family distribution expanded operations to other regions of California. But growth also brought new challenges. Emily found herself torn between managing an increasingly complex business and maintaining focus on the compensation activities she considered essential. One morning, she received a call that made her rethink her priorities. "Mrs. Carter, this is Patricia Morrison Hayes from New York." "Patricia, how are you?" "Well, thank you. I'm calling because, well, my father left a will that was only found now, when we finally managed to organize the belongings in the house where he lived." "What did it say?" "He wrote about you, about what you did for our family, and he left a specific request." "What request?" "He asked that, if I ever had the means, I should help you continue the compensation work. He even set aside an amount specifically for that." Emily was moved. David Morrison, even having passed away without knowing his honor would be restored, had thought about contributing so that other people wouldn't go through the suffering he had experienced. "Patricia, you don't have to do this." "Yes, I do. It's my father's last wish. And besides, I want to be part of this story. I want my daughter to see that her family makes a difference in the world." "Your daughter?" "I have an 8-year-old girl. When I told her about you and what happened to her grandfather, she said that when she grows up, she wants to be just like you." The conversation with Patricia reinforced for Emily the importance of continuing to balance business growth with the winery's social mission. She decided to create a more formal structure for the compensation project, turning it into a non-profit foundation that could receive contributions from other people interested in supporting the cause. The New Beginning Foundation was officially launched on the second anniversary of Emily's arrival in Napa Valley. The event took place at the winery itself, with the attendance of all the people who had been compensated over the 2 years, as well as local authorities and media representatives. The launch speech was given not by Emily, but by Mrs. Margaret Carter, the elderly woman who had lost her entire pension to buy Christmas presents that never arrived. At 98 years old, she was in a wheelchair, but her voice was still firm and emotional. "I've lived almost 100 years," she began, her voice trembling but clear. "I've seen a lot of good and a lot of bad in this world, but I've never seen anything like what this girl did here." She pointed to Emily, who was sitting in the front row with her children. She could have simply ignored our suffering. She could have said it wasn't her problem. But she chose to care. She chose to act. And because of that choice, hundreds of people regained not just money, but dignity. The audience applauded emotionally, and Mrs. Carter continued, "For those of you who are young, especially you children here today, remember, whenever you see injustice, whenever you know of someone suffering, you have a choice. You can pretend it's not your concern, or you can be like Emily. You can choose to care." Mrs. Carter's speech went viral on social media, being shared by millions of people across the country. The story of the winery and the compensation project gained national attention, bringing visitors from distant states and even other countries interested in seeing the experience up close. With the growth in visibility came tempting offers. A large multinational company offered to buy the winery for an amount that would ensure financial comfort for Emily and her children for the rest of their lives. A film producer proposed making a movie about the story, with substantial royalties. All offers were politely declined. "Mum, why don't you accept these offers?" James asked during a family conversation after a particularly generous offer. "We could get rich." "James, we're already rich," Emily Carter replied. "Rich in purpose, rich in relationships, rich in meaning. More money wouldn't make us happier. But it could make some things easier. It could, but it could also complicate others. If we sold everything now, what would happen to Mrs. Dorothy? With the other employees? With the people still waiting for compensation? With the projects we're planning?" Emma, who had just turned 8, surprised everyone with her observation. "Mum, if we sell, who will take care of the sad stories?" The youngest daughter's innocent question perfectly summarized Emily's feelings. She had taken on the responsibility of taking care of the sad stories and couldn't simply transfer that responsibility to others in exchange for personal gain. The third year brought the biggest challenge yet. Richard Thompson decided to sue Emily for misuse of the property he had sold. Through lawyers, he claimed that the victim compensation activities were tarnishing his reputation and that Emily was profiting financially from crimes for which he was already paying legally. It was clearly a meritless lawsuit, but one that demanded time, energy, and resources to fight. Worse still, it created uncertainty about the continuity of operations. Dr. Frederick Anderson, who continued as the winery's lawyer, was categorical in his assessment. "Mrs. Carter, this lawsuit is just an attempt at intimidation. Richard knows he has no chance of winning, but hopes the costs and stress will make you abandon the compensation project. What if he gets an injunction stopping the foundation's activities? It's possible, but temporary. On the merits, he can't win. How long could it last? A year, maybe 2 if he appeals everything." The news of the lawsuit generated a wave of outrage in the local and national community. People who had followed the winery's story through the media mobilized to express support. The most touching mobilization came from the compensated victims themselves. Walter and Gerald Harrison organized a petition signed by all the people who had been helped by the New Beginning Foundation, stating that Emily had always acted with integrity and generosity. Mr. Benedict, the farmer who had sold his cattle to pay for his daughter's wedding wines, gave an emotional testimony on television. "Richard Thompson took my dignity 20 years ago. Emily Carter gave it back to me. Now this man wants to attack who helped me. That's cowardice." Patricia Morrison Hayes came from New York specifically to hold a press conference defending Emily. "My father died carrying the guilt for having trusted Richard Thompson. Emily Carter proved he was innocent and gave me the chance to reconcile with his memory. If anyone is profiting financially from this story, it's certainly not her, who spent her own savings to help strangers." The public support was so significant that the judge in charge of the case decided to expedite the process, granting absolute priority for it to be resolved quickly. While awaiting the court's decision, Emily made an important decision. Instead of reducing activities due to legal uncertainty, she would intensify efforts to complete all pending compensations before any injunction could stop the work. It was a period of frenetic activity. The Foundation's team worked 16 hours a day to locate and compensate the last victims identified in the letters. Emily personally drove thousands of miles, visited dozens of cities, and spoke with hundreds of people. One of the last compensations was particularly significant. It involved a rural school that had ordered special wines for a graduation party of the institution's first high school class. The school had saved for 2 years to provide a worthy celebration for students who would be the first in their families to complete high school. When the wines didn't arrive, the party happened with sodas and juices. But the principal always carried the frustration of not being able to provide something more special for those pioneering youth. Emily not only financially compensated the school, but also organized a class reunion 20 years later, where the former students, now adults with their own families, could finally toast with the special wines that should have been served at graduation. "You have no idea how important this is for us," said one of the former students, now a graduate engineer. That graduation party always stood out as an incomplete moment. Today, you completed our story. The court decision came at the end of the 3rd year, being absolutely favorable to Emily. The judge not only rejected all of Richard's claims, but also convicted him for bad faith litigation and ordered him to pay all court costs. More importantly, the decision officially recognized the legitimacy and social value of the work carried out by the New Beginning Foundation, creating a legal precedent that could be used to protect similar initiatives in the future. The legal victory was celebrated with a party at the winery that brought together over 1,000 people, including authorities, press, employees, compensated victims, and dozens of people who had been inspired by the story to start their own social reparation projects. During the party, Emily gave a public summary of the 3 years of work. "When I arrived here with my 4 children, I just wanted to rebuild our lives after a very painful loss. I never imagined I would find a mission so much bigger than ourselves." She showed a presentation with impressive numbers: 847 people directly compensated, $2.3 million distributed in reparations, 15 direct jobs created, 45 indirect jobs generated through the production chain, 23 similar projects inspired in other regions of the country. "But the numbers don't tell the full story," she continued. "The full story is in the repaired relationships, the restored dignities, the rebuilt trusts. It's in Mr. Benedict talking with his daughter again, in Patricia reconciling with her father's memory, in the Harrison brothers working together once more." The audience applauded emotionally, and Emily concluded, "I've learned in these 3 years that true justice doesn't come only from the courts. It comes from the choices we make every day, from the decision to care, to act, to not accept that injustice is permanent." Emma, now 9 years old, climbed onto the stage and held her mother's hand. "My mother always says that we can't choose the bad things that happen, but we can choose what to do with them," she said with a clear child's voice. She chose to do good things. The girl's speech moved the audience even more and went viral on social media with the hashtag #JaChooseToDoGoodThings, which became a national movement encouraging social reparation actions. By the end of the 4th year of operation, the New Beginning Winery had become not only a prosperous business, but a symbol of social transformation. The property received delegations of students, business people, politicians, and activists from around the world, interested in understanding how to replicate the experience in their own contexts. Emily, now 39 years old, had found a sustainable balance between personal life, business, and social activism. Her children were growing up in a unique environment, learning from an early age that success isn't measured only in money, but in positive impact on other people's lives. James, at 16, had become an expert in viticulture and was planning to study agricultural engineering to further modernize the winery's processes. The twins, Noah and Ethan, at 13, showed interest in the business and social aspects of the venture, often suggesting new ways to expand the reach of the compensations. Emma, at 10, surprised everyone with her emotional maturity and ability to connect with people of all ages who visited the property. "Mum, when I grow up, I want to keep taking care of sad stories," she said, during a conversation while walking through the vineyards. Why, my dear? Because everyone deserves someone who cares about their story. Emma's phrase became the new motto of the New Beginning Foundation. Everyone deserves someone who cares about their story. The fifth year brought an unexpected proposal that would once again test the family's values. The federal government, impressed with the project's results, offered to turn the New Beginning Foundation into a national public policy, with Emily as the general coordinator and a budget of $100 million to replicate the experience across the country. It was a unique opportunity to exponentially increase the impact, but it would require leaving Napa Valley and moving to Washington, D.C. The decision was discussed as a family for weeks. Each child had the right to express their opinion and actively participate in the choice that would affect everyone. If we go to Washington, D.C., we'll be able to help many more people, argued James, always pragmatic. But we'll lose direct contact with the people we've already helped here, pondered Noah. And who will take care of Mrs. Dorothy and the other employees? Asked Ethan. We can't abandon our home, declared Emma categorically. This is where our story happened. Emily spent sleepless nights thinking about the decision. The government's offer was tempting for its potential impact, but there were also risks. Government projects were subject to political changes, excessive bureaucracy, and loss of the flexibility that had allowed the original experience to succeed. The answer came during a routine visit to St. Clair Retirement Home. Sister Catherine, now almost 80 years old, made an observation that changed Emily's perspective. My child, you have already planted the seed. Now you have to decide if you want to be the gardener of a giant garden that you might not be able to care for properly, or if you want to continue being the guardian of a smaller garden where you know every flower. What would Sister do in my place? I would stay here, not out of fear of the greater challenge, but because the work here is not yet complete, and because sometimes it's more important to be deep than to be broad. The decision was communicated to the government in a respectful but firm letter, where Emily explained that she preferred to continue the local work and offer consultations and training for those who wanted to replicate the experience. Instead of accepting the government proposal, the New Beginning Foundation created the Multiplication Program, offering free courses for people interested in starting similar projects in their communities. The program included study guides, video lessons, online consultations, and even scholarships for visits to Napa Valley. The results exceeded all expectations. In 2 years, 127 projects inspired by the winery's experience were started in 23 U.S. states and 8 countries. Each project adapted the methodology to its local reality, but maintained the fundamental principle, transforming injustice into restorative action. Emily realized she had made the right decision. Instead of centralizing the movement in a single government institution, she had created a decentralized and resilient network of people committed to social reparation. The 6th year was marked by a surprising discovery. During a renovation in the winery's basement to expand storage capacity, workers discovered a hidden compartment behind a brick wall. Inside the compartment was a metal box containing documents that revealed an even darker facet of Richard Thompson's history. Beyond the documented scams, he had kept detailed records of blackmail, threats, and even evidence that he had forged documents to seize properties from elderly people. The documents showed that the winery Emily had purchased originally belonged to an Italian family that had been deceived by Richard decades earlier. Through falsified documents, he had managed to transfer the property to his name, leaving the true owners without any means to prove their rights. The discovery created a complex ethical dilemma. Technically, Emily had legitimately purchased the property from the government, which had seized it when Richard disappeared without paying taxes. But morally, she knew there were legitimate heirs who had been deprived of their family heritage. Through Dr. Frederick Anderson, she managed to locate the descendants of the original Italian family. They were 3 elderly siblings living in different cities, children of the couple who had lost the property in the 1970s. The eldest, Joseph Benedict, 78, lived in a small house in Calistoga. When he learned of the discovery, he reacted with a mix of relief and resignation. Miss Emily, for 50 years my father tried to prove that land was ours. He died frustrated, thinking he had lost the family heritage through incompetence. Now we discover he was the victim of a criminal. Mr. Joseph, the property belongs to your family. I am willing to return it. The elderly man looked at her in surprise. What do you mean, return it? The land is rightfully yours. I cannot keep something that does not legitimately belong to me. But you purchased it in good faith, and you have done wonderful things there. It would be unfair. It would be unfair for me to keep the property knowing it was stolen from your family. Joseph remained silent for several minutes, clearly wrestling with complex emotions. Ma'am, may I propose something different? Of course. My siblings and I are already old. We have no interest in running a winery, but we would like the property to remain in the hands of someone who honors it as you have done. What are you suggesting? A partnership. The Benedict family becomes the official owner of the land, but you continue as the lifelong manager. The profits are split 50-50, half for your family, half for social projects chosen by the Benedict family. It was a generous and creative proposal that respected both legitimate rights and the work accomplished. Emily accepted immediately, and the new partnership was formalized in an emotional ceremony attended by the entire community. In this way, we honor the past, acknowledge the present, and build a just future, Joseph said during the ceremony. The story of the voluntary return of the property gained international attention, being cited as an example of business integrity in universities and business schools around the world. Paradoxically, the loss of the property further strengthened Emily's position as the moral leader of the social reparation movement. She had proven that it was not about opportunism or self-promotion, but a genuine commitment to justice and integrity. The Benedict family used their share of the profits to create scholarships for young people from rural families interested in studying sustainable agriculture. The partnership between the two families became a model for resolving property conflicts through dialogue and creativity instead of litigation. The 7th year brought the most significant international recognition yet. Emily Carter was invited to speak at the United Nations General Assembly about local initiatives for social justice. The speech, broadcast to over 200 countries, summarized 7 years of learning and transformations. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, 7 years ago I was just a desperate mother trying to rebuild my life after a family loss. I bought an abandoned property, without knowing I was also buying a history of injustices. At that moment I had a choice: ignore the past and focus only on my future, or take responsibility for repairing damages I hadn't caused. I chose the second option, and that choice changed not only my life but the lives of hundreds of people. I learned that justice isn't something that happens to us, but something we make happen. That historical reparation isn't just the responsibility of governments, but of every citizen who has the ability to act. The project we started at a small winery in Napa Valley proved it's possible to transform suffering into solidarity, injustice into restorative action, despair into hope. Today I invite every person hearing this message to look around and identify injustices that can be repaired, sufferings that can be eased, relationships that can be restored. They don't need to be grand or heroic gestures. Sometimes justice happens in an honest conversation, a financial compensation, a sincere apology, an opportunity offered to someone who was harmed. We learned that everyone deserves someone who cares about their story, and we can all be that person for someone. The speech was interrupted by applause several times and received a standing ovation from almost all delegates present. More importantly, it generated concrete commitments from several countries to support local social reparation initiatives. After the UN trip, Emily returned home with a renewed perspective on her work's impact. It was no longer a local project, but a global movement of people committed to transformative justice. Her children, now teenagers and preteens, had watched their mother's speech on television and felt proud to be part of that story. "Mom, you became famous worldwide," said Emma, now 12. "No, my daughter, we became famous. This is family work, remember? And what are we going to do now that everyone knows our story? We'll keep doing what we've always done, caring for people, producing honest wines, and showing it's possible to turn bad things into good things." James, now 18 and about to enter university, asked a question that surprised Emily. "Mum, have you ever thought about writing a book telling this whole story?" "Why would I do that?" "So other people can learn from our experience, and so our story won't be lost when we're no longer here." The book idea echoed in Emily's mind for weeks. She finally decided she wouldn't write an autobiography, but a practical manual about social reparation, using the winery's experience as a case study. The book Everyone Deserves Someone Who Cares About Their Story was launched in the 8th year and quickly became a bestseller in the United States and several countries where it was translated. All royalties were donated to the New Beginning Foundation and similar organizations worldwide. The book's success generated invitations for lectures at universities, business conferences, and social organization meetings. Emily only accepted invitations that allowed her to return home the same day, maintaining her commitment to never stay away too long from the winery and family. During a lecture at Columbia University, a student asked a question that made her reflect deeply. "Professor Emily, don't you regret having sacrificed the possibility of a simpler, more comfortable life for your social mission?" "Young man, I didn't sacrifice a simple life. I gained a meaningful one. There's a huge difference between those two things." "How so?" "A simple life would be me raising my children, running my business, thinking only about my own well-being. A meaningful life is when you realize your well-being is connected to the well-being of other people. But isn't it harder? It's more complex, not necessarily harder. It's like the difference between playing a simple tune on the piano and playing a symphony. The symphony is more complex, but also richer, more beautiful, more rewarding. And if you could go back and make different choices," Emily smiled before answering. "If I could go back, I'd do everything exactly the same. Because I discovered there's no better feeling in the world than knowing your life made a difference in other people's lives." The 9th year was marked by the international expansion of the social reparation movement. The New Beginning Foundation established partnerships with organizations in 15 countries, creating a global network of transformative justice initiatives. The most successful pilot project was launched in Portugal, in a wine region facing similar problems with dishonest producers. A Portuguese businesswoman who had participated in one of the multiplication courses managed to replicate almost entirely the methodology of Napa Valley, adapting it to the local reality. Other projects emerged in completely different contexts. A group of businessmen in Colombia created a fund to compensate families affected by urban violence. A cooperative in Kenya developed a system to repair environmental damage caused by illegal mining. An organization in Canada started a project to compensate indigenous peoples historically harmed by logging companies. Each project maintained total autonomy, but shared experiences and methodologies through the network coordinated by the New Beginning Foundation. Emily realized she had inadvertently created one of the largest transformative justice networks in the world, all starting with yellowed letters found in a dusty basement. The winery also continued to prosper. Now internationally recognized for the quality of its products and the story of its creation, New Beginning Winery wines were sold in fine restaurants in various world capitals. But Emily made sure to keep production on a scale that allowed total quality control and close relationships with all employees. Unrestrained growth was not in the plans. "Mum, why don't we increase production a lot to make more money?" Noah asked during a family conversation. "Because money is a means, not an end," she replied. "We produce enough wine to support our families and fund our social projects. More than that would be greed, not necessity. But we could help more people if we had more resources. We can help more people by inspiring others to create their own projects. It's more sustainable than centralizing everything in a single organization." Emma, now 14 and showing impressive maturity, added, "It's like that saying, right, Mum? It's better to teach someone to fish than to give them a fish." "Exactly, my daughter." The 10th year of activities was officially declared the Year of Gratitude by the family. Instead of expanding operations or seeking new projects, they would dedicate the entire year to celebrating and giving thanks for everything that had been achieved. The main celebration was a gathering of all the people who had been compensated over the decade. Over 800 people attended the event, transforming the winery into a true temporary city during the celebration weekend. Each compensated person had the opportunity to tell the audience how the experience had impacted their life. The stories were recorded and later compiled into a documentary that would become historical heritage of the region. One of the most moving speeches was from Mrs. Margaret Carter, now 108 years old and in a wheelchair but still lucid and articulate. "I've lived more than a century in this world, saw 2 world wars, saw Brazil transform from a rural country into a powerhouse, saw humanity reach the moon and create the internet. But of everything I witnessed, nothing impressed me more than a young mother who decided to take responsibility for repairing suffering she hadn't caused. Emily, dear, you and your children showed the world that genuine goodness still exists in humanity, that there are still people willing to sacrifice personal comfort to relieve others' suffering. I can die in peace knowing I leave a world where people like you exist and inspire others to follow the same path." Mrs. Margaret's speech moved everyone present, and many participants later reported that moment was a turning point in their own lives, inspiring them to seek ways to make a difference in their communities. The celebration event also included the official launch of New Beginning University, an online educational institution offering free courses on social reparation, transformative justice, ethical entrepreneurship, and community leadership. The teachers were primarily people who had started similar projects in their regions, creating a true people's university of the social reparation movement. Emily, at 45, realized she had built something much larger than she imagined possible when she arrived in Napa Valley as a desperate widow. It wasn't just about a successful business or an effective social project. It was about a legacy of values that would be passed to future generations through hundreds of people who had been inspired to act similarly. Her own children were living proof of this legacy. James, now graduated in agricultural engineering, had developed sustainable viticulture techniques being replicated by producers throughout Latin America. Noah and Ethan, 19 years old, were studying business administration and psychology respectively, already planning how to contribute to expanding the social reparation movement. Emma, at 15 years old, demonstrated natural leadership and spoke fluently about social justice in youth lectures. During a family conversation in the winery's backyard on a starry Napa Valley night, Emily reflected on the journey they had taken. "Children, when we arrived here 10 years ago, I was broken. Financially, emotionally, spiritually broken. I thought I had lost everything when we lost your father. But I discovered that when you lose something important, it opens space to find something even more important. We lost the life we had but gained a life we didn't even know was possible. You became people who genuinely care about others' suffering. That's worth more than any financial inheritance I could leave you." James, always thoughtful, made an observation that perfectly summarized the family experience. "Mum, we didn't inherit a winery. We inherited a mission." "And what is that mission?" Emily asked, curious to hear her children's perspective. "To show that it's possible to transform pain into purpose," Emma answered without hesitation. "To prove that every person matters and deserves to have their dignity recognized," Noah completed. "Teaching that true justice happens when those who can help decide to help," Ethan concluded. Emily smiled, knowing the mission would be in good hands when the time came to pass the torch to the next generation. At the end of the 10th year, she received news that the social reparation movement had been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. Regardless of the outcome, the nomination represented worldwide recognition that local initiatives of transformative justice could have a global impact. But for Emily, the most valuable prize remained the possibility of sleeping every night, knowing she had used her life to make a difference in the lives of others. And that upon finding hundreds of unopened letters in an abandoned basement, she had chosen not only to read them, but to answer each one with concrete actions of reparation and hope. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're watching from. If you have something to share with us, leave it in the comments with sincere words. Do you think Emily made the right decisions? We'd love to read your opinion. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to leave your like and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other exciting stories. End of story.